I was 23 and driving across the country in a small van. It wasn't one of those really nice ones with the whole setup or anything. Mine wasn't big and basically just had a mattress in the back, with a bunch of stuff in cardboard boxes all over the floor. My parents lived on the West Coast, where I was headed to store a lot of my stuff at their place, while I figured out my whole situation. It was kind of a mess, to be honest. Anyway, this was my first time even going on a drive this far, and not staying in any hotels along the way. The first full day went decently. It was exhausting, but manageable. I think I drove a total of 14 hours, so by the time I felt ready to stop for the night, it was around 12 a.m. There was a sign for a rest stop in 20 miles, which I assumed would have a bunch of truckers and other cars also staying there to sleep. However, when I pulled in, I immediately noticed how wrong I was. The rest stop was down an exit ramp from the highway and went sort of into a wooded area, with trees covering all views of the road, and there wasn't a single car or truck there. When I parked and looked around, I got a really unsettling feeling. It was so tucked away and isolated from the highway, and with nobody else around, it felt almost like I was parked at an abandoned building in the middle of a desolate forest. You'd think nobody being around would be peaceful, but it was the exact opposite. I turned my van off and got out to go into the building and use the restroom. Couldn't even hear any cars on the highway. It was just the calm sound of cicadas in the trees. I walked into the rest stop, and it was fairly clean. I don't know if that meant people were here a lot, or the other way around. As I walked back to my van, though, I got that uneasy feeling again. The forest around me was really dense, and it almost felt like something or someone was lurking out there. Of course, I chalked the feeling up to being nervous about my first time sleeping in a van at a rest stop, and nothing more. I got inside and pulled a curtain across the front of the cab, blocking any views from the front into the back. Then I laid down on my mattress, and despite all the unsettling feelings, I was exhausted enough to fall asleep pretty much instantly. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to hearing voices outside of the van. I quickly sat up and listened. Sounded like two men talking somewhere just outside of my van, maybe in the parking spot right next to mine. I checked the time. It was 3 a.m. I thought it was almost impossible that the parking lot went from completely empty to full enough that someone would park right next to me, but I really hoped that was the case. I got up and pulled the curtains back just enough to peek my head out. I looked out at the parking area and didn't see a single other car. Then I looked out the other window, instantly locking eyes with a man staring right at me from just outside the window. I froze, and the man quickly went behind the van walls, away from the window. I backed away and pulled the curtains across the front. Then I froze again. I heard both men whisper back and forth, before it suddenly went quiet. Neither were talking, and I didn't hear any movement. I must have waited 5 minutes before pulling the curtain back and looking around. As it seemed, the men were gone. I looked in all directions, even checking the mirrors, but they were nowhere. They must have snuck away into the woods, which made me even more unsettled. I grabbed my keys, turned on the van, and pulled out of the rest stop. No way I was gonna sleep there after that. I started driving, and I'm not sure if the light hadn't come on yet, or if I was too focused on getting away from there to realize it right away, but I made it just halfway up the ramp leading onto the highway when I noticed my van was really struggling to gain speed. Then I noticed a blinking red light on my dash. It was for my back right tire, and as soon as I saw it, I could feel it too. The wheel felt like it was dragging on the pavement. I looked in the mirror, and it was even more noticeable from there. My stomach sank. It had to be those men outside the van. I really did my best not to panic, but all the horrifying thoughts started to flood my mind. I frantically looked in the mirrors, making sure the guys weren't coming up from anywhere, as I thought of the best way to get out of this situation. The big problem was that since I had stopped on an incline from the road connecting to the highway, the van couldn't go up with the busted tire. And then I heard something outside. I looked up at the forest beside me. I stared out for a second, feeling the tension rising, before a sudden knock came at the window next to me. It was that guy, smiling and knocking on my window. "Hey, need some help? I can change that tire for you, if you need. Don't think you'll be getting out of here anytime soon, with the wheel looking like that," he said in a disturbingly calm voice. I found it really creepy that he didn't come up in a car or anything, and he never mentioned the other guy that I knew I heard him talking to before. I was so scared though, I didn't even respond. I got my phone out and started dialing 911, hoping the man seeing me call the police would scare him enough to leave. But the man knocked on the window again, saying he'd help me and that I didn't need to call anyone. As I started explaining my situation to the operator, the man got more aggressive, hitting the window and even trying to open the door, which was when I knew I couldn't wait for the cops to get here. I needed to leave immediately. I put the van in reverse and started rolling back down the ramp. I'm not gonna lie, it sounded like the van was dying. The scraping and thumping from the wheel, knowing it could fall off and get me even more stranded, was terrifying. The man followed as well, trying to chase my van down to the rest stop. Once I was back on the flat surface of the parking lot, I floored it, this time not stopping on the incline, and barely my van made it up to the highway. I drove a bit, still with the tire making awful sounds and probably killing my van. Then I pulled off and waited for the cops. The men didn't seem to have a car, and they didn't seem to chase me onto the highway, probably because the rest stop was isolated and they could get away with whatever they were trying without any witnesses around. But when the cops arrived and looked for them, they were gone. I'm pretty sure had I stayed in my van and not tried to leave, the men would have broken inside. And if I'd opened the door or let the man try to fix my tire, which obviously he had slashed, the other guy was likely hiding in the forest nearby, waiting to jump me. What they were really trying, I'm not sure. Maybe it was to steal my van and everything in it. But from everything that happened, leaving me as a witness seems unlikely. So I have a feeling that night was really close to being my last.